My driveway was suddenly occupied by a stranger in a tight black t-shirt, grinning like he'd just hit the jackpot. Rolling his shoulders and crossing his arms, he commanded me to back off. He wanted to bleed me, completely oblivious to the fact that violence used to be my day job. The death of a marriage isn't a sudden explosion. It's a slow leak. A tire losing pressure over 1,000 miles until you're riding on the rim, wondering why the steering feels heavy. For Megan and me, the leak started 3 years ago. Right around the time I took a desk job in logistics, spreadsheets, quarterly reviews, khakis that always felt too stiff. I was 38. My knees popped when it rained, and I was desperately trying to be normal. I was trying to be the guy who complained about property taxes and crabgrass instead of the guy who used to wake up at 0300 in a shipping container in Fallujah. Megan never really knew that version of me. We met a year after my discharge. By then, I had boxed up the medals, shoved the tactical gear into a plastic bin in the attic, and buried the memories under a deliberate manufactured calm. I didn't talk about the teams. I didn't watch war movies. If a loud noise went off, I forced myself to blink slowly instead of hitting the deck. I wanted a quiet life. I wanted a soft life. I wanted her. But quiet gets boring. It started with the gym. Megan decided she wanted to take a women's self-defense class at a place called Apex Grappling downtown. I thought it was a great idea. 2 nights a week turned into 4. Then came the weekend seminars. Then came the sudden wardrobe shift, the overpriced athletic wear, the protein powders cluttering the kitchen counter, the constant texting. I didn't snoop. I didn't need to. When you spend a decade reading the baseline behavior of hostile crowds, a cheating spouse is about as subtle as a flare gun in a dark room. She was defensive when her phone buzzed. She smelled like a specific brand of sandalwood body wash that we didn't own. Her eyes, whenever they met mine, carried that distinct cloudy mixture of guilt and contempt. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday. It was raining. The house smelled like the pot roast sitting in the slow cooker. I was at the kitchen island staring at the utility bill when she walked in from training. She dropped her gym bag by the door. The strap caught the edge of a side table, knocking over a framed picture of us from a vacation in Maine. It hit the hardwood with a sharp crack, the glass spider webbing across our smiling faces. Megan didn't even flinch. She just looked at it, then looked at me. "I'm not picking that up, Ryan," she said. Her voice was flat, dead. "I know," I said. I slid the utility bill aside. "Are you going back to his place tonight? Or are you staying here?" She froze. The bravado slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing the panicked teenager beneath before the hardened mask snapped back into place. She crossed her arms. "How long have you known?" "Long enough." She walked over to the fridge, opened it, and stared inside as if the leftover Tupperware held the answers to the universe. "His name is Derek. He owns the gym." "Okay." She shut the fridge harder than necessary. "Is that it? Just okay? You're not going to yell? You're not going to throw a plate against the wall?" She laughed, a short, bitter sound that scraped against the silence of the kitchen. "God, you're so predictable. You're just nothing." I kept my hands flat on the granite countertop. In the teams, losing your temper meant losing your life. You train to lower your heart rate when the bullets start flying. You train to breathe through the panic. My heart was breaking, tearing itself apart in my chest, but my breathing stayed even. "What do you want me to do, Megan?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to care," she snapped, finally looking at me. "I want you to be a man. Derek. Derek takes what he wants. He's alive. He's passionate. You just sit there, day after day, watering the lawn and paying the bills. You're weak, Ryan. I'm sorry, but it's the truth. You're a soft, suburban drone. I can't breathe in this house anymore." I looked at the woman I had built my entire fragile peace around. She thought my restraint was weakness. She thought the cage I had built to keep the monster inside was proof that the monster didn't exist. "If that's how you feel," I said, standing up slowly, "I'll pack a bag. You can keep the house until we figure out the lawyers." She blinked, surprised by how easy it was. She wanted a fight. She wanted a dramatic screaming match to justify what she had done to make me the villain so she could be the victim. I didn't give it to her. I walked upstairs, packed a duffel bag with a week's worth of clothes, and walked out the front door. I didn't look back. I rented a cheap motel room out by the interstate, the kind of place with flickering neon signs and carpets that felt sticky if you stood in one place too long. It was fine. I'd slept in worse places, usually while people were actively trying to kill me. For 2 weeks, Megan and I communicated only through brief sterile texts about logistics, who was paying the electric bill, when the cable guy was coming. It was a cold surgical separation. Then she asked me to come to the house on a Saturday morning to help move a heavy oak dresser out of the spare bedroom. She wanted to turn it into a home gym. I didn't care enough to argue. I just wanted my remaining tools from the garage. When I pulled my truck into the driveway, there was a matte black lifted Tacoma parked awkwardly across the curb, partially blocking the walkway. The license plate frame read, Apex Grappling. I parked on the street and walked up the drive. The front door was wide open. Derek was standing in my hallway. He was exactly what I expected. Late 20s, maybe early 30s, thick neck, cauliflower ear on the right side. He wore a tight rash guard that clung to every muscle, despite the fact that he was ostensibly here to move furniture. He had that loose, swinging posture of a guy who spends his life on padded mats, accustomed to being the toughest guy in an air-conditioned room. Megan was standing next to him. She looked nervous. "Ryan," she said, her voice tight, "this is Derek." Derek didn't offer his hand. He looked me up and down, taking in my faded jeans, my scuffed work boots, the slight grain at my temples. He smirked. "So, this is the famous Ryan," Derek said, his voice loud, designed to bounce off the walls and assert ownership of the space. "Megan told me you were coming to grab your toys from the garage. Just here for my tools," I said quietly. I stepped past him, giving him a wide berth not out of fear, but because he smelled aggressively of Axe body spray and sweat. "Hey, hold up," Derek said, stepping sideways to block the hallway. I stopped. I didn't square up. I just stood there, relaxed, hands hanging loosely at my sides. "Excuse me. Megan told me about you." Derek sneered, leaning in slightly. He was trying to invade my space, a classic intimidation tactic. "Said you didn't even put up a fight when she left. Said you just packed your little bag and ran away. I gotta say, man, that's pathetic. You let another man step into your house, take your wife, and you don't do a damn thing?" "Derek, don't," Megan muttered, though she didn't sound entirely displeased. She was watching me, waiting to see if I would finally crack. I looked at Derek, really looked at him. My brain, acting on a decade of muscle memory, automatically began the threat assessment. Weight heavily on the back foot, chin jutted out, exposed, hands low, relaxed, but arrogant, center of gravity high. If I sweep the lead leg, he goes down on the hardwood. If I strike the throat, the fight is over in 2 seconds. If I take the outside angle, I blinked, shutting the tactical overlay down. I took a slow breath. "You can have the dresser, Derek," I said. "I don't care about the furniture. Just let me get to the garage." Derek laughed. He actually slapped his own thigh. "Jesus, she was right. You are a complete coward." He took a step forward, bringing his chest inches from mine. "You know, in my world, when a guy disrespects you, you check him. You demand satisfaction. But you're just a sheep. I'm not interested in your world," I said. Derek reached out and shoved me in the chest. It wasn't a hard shove, just a stiff arm push designed to provoke a reaction. My boots didn't move an inch. I absorbed the kinetic energy, letting my torso rock back slightly while my feet remained planted. "Don't touch me," I said. The tone of my voice dropped an octave. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. Derek's eyes narrowed. He didn't like that I hadn't stumbled. He didn't like the absolute stillness in my eyes. The smirk vanished, replaced by a dark, ugly ego. "Or what?" Derek challenged. "What are you going to do, accountant? Call the cops?" He pointed a thick finger at my face. "I run open mat tonight at 7, Apex Grappling downtown. You want to pretend you're a man? You want to actually fight for something in your miserable life? Come down. Sign a waiver. Put on some gloves. I'll show you the difference between a predator and prey." He stepped back, crossing his arms, looking at Megan for validation. She looked away, suddenly uncomfortable with the reality of the violence she had provoked. I looked at Derek. He was a bully, a guy who learned how to choke out hobbyists on a weekend and thought it made him a warrior. He didn't know what violence was. He didn't know what it looked like when the rules went away, when there was no referee to tap you out, when the blood on the floor wasn't from a bloody nose but from a severed artery. I had spent my entire adult life running away from the violence inside me. I had let my wife disrespect me, let this guy walk into my home, because I was terrified of what would happen if I opened that box in my head again. But looking at Derek's smug face, I realized something. Sometimes the cage doesn't keep the monster in. Sometimes it just keeps you trapped with it. Apex grappling, I repeated, my voice entirely devoid of emotion. 7 o'clock. Yeah, Derek scoffed. If you don't show, I'm coming back here and tossing the rest of your crap on the lawn. I didn't say another word. I turned around, walked into the garage, grabbed my toolbox and walked out. I didn't look at Megan. I didn't look at Derek. I drove back to the motel. I sat on the edge of the cheap mattress and looked at my hands. They were scarred. The knuckles were calloused, flat from years of hitting heavy bags, concrete, and bone. They hadn't made a fist in anger in a very long time. I slowly curled my fingers inward. The joints popped, a familiar, hollow sound in the quiet room. I wasn't doing this for Megan. She was gone and I didn't want her back. I was doing this because Derek needed a lesson in humility. And because God helped me, a small, dark part of me was tired of being quiet. 6:30. I got in the truck and drove downtown. Apex grappling sat between a discount liquor store and a dying laundromat in a strip mall that had seen better decades. The front windows were plastered with vinyl decals of snarling pit bulls and crossed fists. I pushed through the glass door, and the wall of humid air hit me immediately. Smelled like bleach, old sweat, and cheap rubber. Loud, bass-heavy hip-hop rattled the drop ceiling. A dozen guys were rolling on the sprawling blue mats in the center of the room. They were a mix of college kids trying to look tough and middle-aged men trying to outrun their desk jobs. Derek was holding court in the corner near a chain-link cage. He was shirtless now, wearing tight black fight shorts, hitting pads held by a stocky guy with a shaved head. Pop, pop, pop. Derek's punches were fast. He had decent rotation. He threw the head kick that smacked loudly against the leather pad. The sycophants sitting on the benches murmured their approval. Megan was sitting with them. She had her legs crossed, staring at her phone, looking profoundly out of place under the harsh fluorescent tubes. I walked to the front desk. A teenager with acne and a cauliflower ear slid a clipboard toward me. Drop-in fee is $20. Sign the waiver. I paid in cash. I read the waiver. It was standard boilerplate. Hold harmless. Assume all risks of serious injury or death. I scrawled my signature at the bottom. Hey, Derek had spotted me. He dropped his hands, grinning, chest heaving slightly from the pad work. The gym went entirely quiet. The music still thumped, but the rolling stopped. The heavy bag stopped swinging. Every eye in the room turned to the guy in the faded denim jacket and work boots. I'll be damned, Derek yelled, his voice echoing. The accountant actually showed up. He walked over to the edge of the mat, leaning on the padded boundary wall. I gotta admit, Ryan, I didn't think you had the stones. Figured you were halfway to another state by now. I took off my jacket, folded it, placed it neatly on a folding chair near the desk. I unlaced my boots and kicked them off, pulling off my socks. Stepping onto the cold floor barefoot felt strangely familiar. It grounded me. You need gear? Derek asked, tossing a pair of 4-ounce MMA gloves at my feet. Or do you just want to get this over with? I looked down at the gloves. Then I looked at him. I don't need them. Derek chuckled, a harsh grating sound. He bumped fists with the stocky pad holder. Suit yourself, tough guy. Bare knuckle it is. Greg, get the timer. I stepped onto the blue mat. The vinyl gave slightly under my weight. Megan finally looked up from her phone. Our eyes met. There was no fear in her expression, just a kind of exhausted embarrassment. She was embarrassed for me. She thought I was going to get humiliated in front of 20 strangers, and that it would just be one more pathetic memory to add to her justification for leaving. "All right, rules," Derek said, bouncing lightly on the balls of his feet. He was loose, confident. "We go until someone taps. Strikes are open. Takedowns are open. You want out, you slap the mat. Understand?" "I understand," I said. I didn't take a fighting stance. I didn't raise my hands to protect my face. I stood dead center, shoulders relaxed, arms hanging loose. In the teams, they drill economy of motion into your marrow. Every flinch costs energy. Every unnecessary twitch telegraphs your intent. You become a void, giving the enemy nothing to read. Derek hated it. He wanted aggression. He wanted fear. My absolute stillness confused him, and confusion breeds anger. "Time," Greg yelled. Derek exploded forward. He didn't want a grappling match. He wanted a knockout highlight reel for his buddies. He closed the distance in 2 rapid steps, launching a heavy right overhand aimed straight at my jaw. It was a street fighter's punch, loaded with bad intentions and terrible technique. I didn't block. I just stepped 3 inches to the left. The punch cut empty air, whispering past my ear. Derek's momentum pulled him off balance. I could have broken his elbow right then, hyperextending the joint against the momentum, but I didn't. I just tapped the back of his shoulder as he stumbled past, a gentle push to help him on his way. He caught his balance spinning around, his face flushing dark red. The guys on the side stopped smirking. Lucky, Derek spat. He came in again, this time with a jab cross combo, followed by a low leg kick. I slipped the jab, parried the cross with an open palm, and as the leg kick came in, I didn't retreat. I stepped into it. I turned my knee outward, taking the brunt of his shin directly on the thickest part of my tibia. Crack. It sounded like a baseball bat hitting a telephone pole. Derek gasped. He backed up rapidly, limping slightly, his face contorting in sudden sharp agony. Checking a kick is simple physics. If you meet the swinging limb with a grounded, hardened structure, the swinging limb breaks first. "You done?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the thumping rap music. "Screw you," Derek snarled. He realized striking wasn't going to work. He decided to take it to his domain. He lowered his level and shot in for a double leg takedown. This was his mistake. He treated it like a sport. He reached for the back of my knees, expecting me to sprawl or try to hook his arms. He expected a wrestling scramble. I didn't wrestle. As he shot in, dropping his head, I simply dropped my weight and stepped back with one foot, driving the heel of my palm sharply into the back of his neck, right at the base of the skull. At the same time, I hooked his lead arm and yanked it upward. His face slammed into the mat with a sickening thud. His momentum, redirected by my grip, drove his shoulder directly into the floor, separating the joint. He screamed. It wasn't a tough guy yell. It was a high, thin wail of pure terror. I didn't stop. Combat isn't a conversation. You don't pause to see if they've learned their lesson. You dominate the space until the threat is neutralized. I dropped my knee heavily onto his floating ribs, pinning him flat to the vinyl. The air rushed out of his lungs in a wet wheeze. I slid my left arm under his chin, locking a rear naked choke. But I didn't just squeeze the neck like a jiu-jitsu practitioner looking for a submission. I drove my forearm directly across his windpipe, crushing down while my right hand gripped his hair, pulling his head back, exposing the fragile mechanics of his throat. It was a kill hold. The bass from the ceiling speakers thumped against my skull, but the room itself had gone dead quiet. You could hear the squeak of a sneaker shifting against the vinyl. You could hear the buzzing of the fluorescent tube light flickering above the front desk. Mostly, though, you could hear Derek choking. He thrashed. It wasn't the coordinated hip-escaping movement of a grappler trying to break a hold. It was the frantic spastic jerking of an animal caught in a snare. His heavy legs kicked out blindly, his bare heels drumming a panicked rhythm against the blue mat. His hands clawed at my forearm, his blunt fingernails dug into my skin, dragging down, scraping away ribbons of epidermis. He was trying to find leverage that simply didn't exist. I didn't move. My weight was dead, anchored by gravity and a decade of muscle memory. My knee dug sharply into his floating ribs, compressing his lung capacity to a shallow, useless flutter. I dragged my left forearm a quarter-inch higher, slotting it perfectly against the rigid cartilage of his windpipe. The pressure was absolute. I looked down into his face. His skin, previously flushed with arrogant heat, was rapidly turning the color of bruised plums. The veins in his temples stood out like thick blue cords, but it was his eyes that told the real story. The bravado had vanished. The cocky gym owner who thought a black belt made him invincible was gone. Staring back at me was just a terrified boy realizing his rulebook had no power here. I leaned my head down. My mouth hovered an inch from his cauliflower ear. He smelled like sour sweat, artificial pine body wash, and raw fear. "This is the part you didn't understand, Derek," I whispered. My voice was a flat, grating rasp. It didn't belong in a brightly lit gym. It belonged in a wet trench. You play on mats. You play for points. You have timers and buzzers and a guy with a whistle to step in and save you when you get tired. His jaw clamped shut. A wet, bubbling sound leaked from his nose. "I didn't play," I said. "I survived." His right hand abandoned my arm. It slapped the mat. Smack, smack, smack. In his world, that was the ultimate eject button. You tap, the pain stops. You bump fists and you grab a protein shake. It was a social contract. I ignored the tap. I held the pressure steady. I needed him to look over the edge. I needed him to feel the cold, terrifying draft of the void. I counted the seconds in my head. 1001, 1002, 1003. His eyes rolled back slightly. The thrashing slowed to a weak, pathetic tremor. His body was shutting down, prioritizing oxygen for the brain, preparing for the dark. Then I released the lock. I didn't shove him away. I just unspooled my arms, stood up fluidly, and took a measured step backward, returning to a neutral, balanced stance. Derek violently rolled onto his side. He curled into a tight, trembling ball, clutching his throat with both hands. He sucked in a massive, ragged breath that sounded like tearing canvas, followed instantly by a fit of violent, wet coughing. He gagged, spitting a string of thick saliva onto his own blue mats. His separated shoulder sagged uselessly against his chest. Nobody moved to help him. The stocky pad holder, Greg, stood frozen by the cage, the leather mitts hanging limply from his hands. The college kids were perfectly still. They were looking at me the way you look at a loose dog that just mauled someone on your front lawn. I turned my head and found Megan. She was standing by the bleachers. Her phone lay on the floor. The screen shattered. She had both hands clamped tightly over her mouth, her knuckles white. She stared at Derek, groveling and weeping on the floor. Then slowly, her gaze crawled up to meet mine. For 3 years, I had built a cage to protect her from the man standing in front of her. I had worn the stiff khakis, pushed the lawnmower, and swallowed her contempt, all to keep the monster locked away. She had mistaken my restraint for weakness. She had wanted someone alive. She had wanted danger. Now she was looking at it, and she was terrified. Her eyes were wide, glassy, and filled with a profound, suffocating realization. She saw the absolute lack of remorse in my posture. She saw the cold arithmetic of violence that governed my breathing. The suburban illusion was dead on the floor between us. I waited for the rush of vindication. I waited for the anger to justify the last 3 years of my life. It didn't come. I just felt tired. A bone-deep hollow exhaustion settled into my joints. Hitting Derek didn't fix my marriage. It didn't rewind the clock. It just proved that I was still capable of breaking things when I needed to. I turned my back on them. I walked over to the cheap metal folding chair. I picked up my faded denim jacket, slipped my bare feet into my scuffed work boots without tying the laces, and grabbed my toolbox. I walked toward the exit. The glass door swung open, and the heavy, humid air of the gym broke against the cool night outside. The parking lot was empty, save for my truck and Derek's ridiculous lifted Tacoma. The rain had washed the asphalt clean, leaving it slick and mirroring the amber glow of the streetlights overhead. I tossed the toolbox into the bed of my truck. The metal crashed loudly against the bed liner, the sound ringing out into the quiet street. I climbed into the cab. The bench seat was cold. I put the key in the ignition and turned it. The engine caught with a low, steady rumble. I rested my hands on the steering wheel. They were perfectly still. No tremors, no adrenaline shakes. The house belonged to her now. The furniture, the memories, the slow leak of our shared life. It was all hers. I put the truck in drive. For the first time in a very long time, the road ahead was dark, empty, and entirely mine. Thank you for sticking around to the end of Ryan's story. Sometimes the most dangerous people in the room are the ones who never have to raise their voice. If you felt the tension in this one and want more gritty, grounded stories about survival, respect, and quiet vengeance, do me a massive favor. Hit that like button, share this video with a friend, and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments what you do in Ryan's shoes. See you in the next one.